Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Amna Gul from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at CAST. We're back with the course Communication Skills for Media, bearing the code GMC 232. It's our 13th lecture, and the topic today is Communication Apprehension, CA, which is a continuation of our last lecture. In this lecture, we'll continue studying cognitive restructuring. First, let me give you a review of what we studied in our last lecture so that we can keep the continuity. We discussed about communication apprehension, that this is something which is very common. For example, if you feel you have communication apprehension, you are not the only one. Communication apprehension is a broad term that refers to an individual's fear of anxiety, fear or anxiety associated with either real or anticipated communication with another person or persons. The most important thing is it is not just about the real communication, but just the fear of having a communication, anticipating any communication with someone. So it is a state of fear that many people have, and usually most of the people usually have this fear. Then we classified CA into three types. For the first one that we studied was trait anxiety, which was actually related to one's individual personality, the type of personality that person has. For example, there are certain people who are shy, so that is actually trait anxiety. Then there is status anxiety, which actually refers to, which is basically on the basis of the external situation or the stimulus in which people find themselves. So it is about the conditions, about the setup that they are in that gives them that anxiety. And the third is scrutiny fear, which is actually the fear of being watched or observed. Those people who are having this kind of fear, they even have problem doing chores in front of other people, doing normal things. It's not just about speaking even, it's about other things as well. So the people who are having scrutiny fear, they find it difficult. For example, many times you might have observed that if you were attempting your annual exams or any exams, and any of the teachers or examiners, he comes closer and watches over your paper, so you get kind of disturbed and you are having a fear, you are unable to write. If you have that thing, you are undergoing scrutiny fear. Then we move towards frame of reference. We discussed that the frame of reference is something relative. For example, in this picture, as we can see, for one person, that person feels that she is still, because the frogs, obviously I'm using the term she, the pronoun she, and the one standing outside, for her, the other person is moving. So frame of reference is different, and it is dependent on us how we view things upon our frame of reference. We divided frames of reference into two, habitual and personal frames of reference. Then we moved our discussion to cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring, we clarified that since there is a major difference between presenting to a public audience versus presenting to a small group of close friends, which involves one attitude about the situation. Thus, overcoming communication apprehension is as much a matter of changing one's attitude as it is developing one's skill as a speaker. A change in attitude can be fostered through self-reflective regimen called cognitive restructuring, which is an internal process through which individuals can deliberately adjust how they perceive an action or experience. Remember, it's an internal process and it is done deliberately. Okay? Now, cognitive restructuring is a three-step internal process. The first one is identifying objectively what you think. The second one, identify any inconsistencies between perception and reality. The third, replace destructive thinking with supportive thinking. It's too good even in personal lives as well. Everywhere, wherever you are having problems, it's too good to go for cognitive restructuring. I'll explain these things. See, these steps are easy to understand, but they perhaps might be a bit difficult to execute. The first step is to identify objectively what you are thinking as you approach a public speaking opportunity. Recall we earlier studied that your habitual frame of reference. So the first step in cognitive restructuring is to shine a bright light directly on it. This will be different for each student undertaking the process. After it's been a couple of semesters or even years that I've had students with this class. So the two most concerns most often described are the feelings of being the center of attention, as if you are under a collective microscope with everybody's eyes on you, and the feeling that the audience is just waiting for you to make a mistake or slip up somehow, and that their disapproval will be swift, immediate, and embarrassing. Now, let's discuss how CR might be applied to each of these widely held perceptions. Probably the most common concern people have is being the center of attention. When people describe this specific scrutiny fear, they use phrases like, everyone just stares at me, or I don't like having all eyes on me. Consider for a moment what your experiences have been like when you have been a member of the audience for any other speaker. Where did you look while the person spoke? Did you look at the speaker? See, direct eye contact can mean different things in different cultures, but in the current scenarios, especially since most of us now follow US culture, eye contact is the primary means for an audience to demonstrate that they are listening to a speaker. Nobody likes to be ignored, and most members of the audience would not want to be perceived as ignoring the speaker. That would be rude. So, compare. Before CR, before cognitive restructuring, the frame of reference reflects the idea that everyone is staring at me. After cognitive restructuring, the perception is altered to the audience is looking at me to be supportive and polite. After all, I'm the one doing all the talking. See, it's as simple as that. Another common concern is the fear of being judged harshly or making an embarrassing mistake. Now, once again, go back to that memory of you as a member of the audience. But this time, reflect on what sort of expectations you had at the time. Did you expect the speaker to be flawless and riveting? Did you have in mind some super high level of performance below which the speaker would have disappointed you? Probably you did not, unless you had the chance to watch some prominent speaker. Think back to any experiences you might have had watching another speaker struggle, perhaps a classmate during one of his presentations. Witnessing something like that can be uncomfortable. Did you feel empathy for the person struggling? Isn't it a much more pleasant experience when the speaker does well? Again, the vast majority of people empathize with the speaker when it comes to the quality of the presentation. They are willing to give the speaker a chance to say what they want to say. Thus, before cognitive restructuring, the frame of reference reflects the idea that everyone is judging me harshly. And after cognitive restructuring, the perception is altered to the audience. The audience is willing to listen to what I have to say because it's a more pleasant experience for them if the speaker is successful. Now, another example. Consider what comes into your mind if you are to deliver a public presentation. Are your thoughts consumed with many uncertainties? What if I make a mistake? What if they don't like what I am talking about? What if now you try your own version of cognitive restructuring? Put yourself in the role of audience member and ask yourself whether your fears as a speaker are consistent with your expectations as an audience member. Remember that just like you, the audience wants the speaker to succeed. Of course, cognitive restructuring, unfortunately, is always easier said than done. It is a process that takes time, patience, and practice. The most important thing to remember is that you are trying cognitive restructuring as a means of breaking a habit, and habits are formed over periods of time. These are never done instantaneously. The breaking of a habit similarly cannot be done instantaneously, but gradually, over time, and with deliberate effort. Here, I would like to share a video with you regarding cognitive restructuring so you get a better idea of what it is. Let's watch.
Racing and let our thoughts go. And this is more likely to happen the longer our thoughts have been going on without us being mindful of them, or if our thoughts are associated with a particularly strong emotion. Because, as we've discussed before, our thoughts and our feelings are closely connected. And so if we're worrying because we're feeling anxious, our anxiety is likely to cause us to worry even more. And then this increased worrying feeds back into our anxiety and makes us even more anxious. And so if you're having trouble letting go of your thoughts or slowing down your mind, you can try taking a step back from your thoughts and looking at things from a different perspective by reframing your thoughts with what we call cognitive restructuring. And then if you're able to see things from a different perspective and change the way you're thinking, because our thoughts and our feelings are so closely connected, you'll usually notice a corresponding change in your mood. And so here are some questions you can ask yourself to help give yourself a different perspective and change the way you're thinking, and in turn, change the way you feel. The first set of questions are based on, how do I know my thought is true? What is the evidence or proof that my thought is true? Is there any evidence that disproves my thought? And what's the evidence that this thought may not be true or not completely true? Are there any facts I'm ignoring or have overlooked? Are there any small things that contradict my thought that I may be discounting as unimportant? Am I using any words or phrases that are extreme or exaggerated, such as should, must, always, never? Am I reading someone else's mind and treating that as fact?
See, it is very, very important to ask these questions. Such self-reflection is so very much important if you want to if you want to overcome your communication apprehension. For that matter, to do cognitive restructuring, it is not a one-time process, but if you start doing it, the benefit is that your mind will be restructured to think that particular way. For example, there are certain people, for example, they're afraid of speaking in public. So it's a vicious cycle. Every time they have an experience, they're afraid of it and they keep on thinking about it the same way. But if they go for cognitive restructuring and they tell themselves it's not such a big deal, so with every passing moment, their mind will be restructured. It would start thinking differently about communication and they can overcome their communication apprehension. Let's continue with the rest of the questions, but this is something that you should actually try to answer these questions whenever you are having communication and apprehension.
the next set of questions are based on, are there any other possible explanations? Can I see any other way of viewing this? If my friend was having this thought, what would I tell them? And if they...
Now, this question is once again very much important. Firstly, for example, whenever we are having any such issues, we need to revisit. Is there any other way of us viewing the situation? For example, you have a presentation coming up and you are so anxious that you're going to fail and things are going to be real bad for you. So revisit. Is there any other way of anticipating this thing? Okay, that you're gonna make, you will present successfully and everyone would applaud for you. Isn't it possible? Now the second question, if it were any of your friends having this kind of a negative thought, what would you tell them? Because most of the times, all these people having communication apprehension, they tend to have a lot of it, but when they have to advise someone, I mean, they one of their friends is in their shoes, so they tend to give them really positive advice or good enough suggestions. So this is another very, very important question to ask.
Knew I was having this thought, what would they say to me? When I'm not feeling this way, do I look at this situation any differently? 5 years from now, if I look back on this situation, might I look at it any differently? Am I blaming myself for something over which I don't have complete control? Have I had any experiences that show that this thought isn't true all of the time?
See, if you don't have, as for the last question, if you do not have your personal experiences that tell you that this thought isn't true, always you have seen others, for example, that there were students who wouldn't do well in their first or second or third presentation, and then later on they could present very well, they had all the confidence, they controlled their non-verbals. So if you have any such experiences, revisit those and build up on those, the positive thoughts that you have about your success, about other people succeeding. This helps a lot.
Are there any strengths in me that I'm ignoring? Are there any positives to the situation that I'm ignoring? And finally, a group of questions around the theme, what can I do to help me deal with this situation? What have I learned from previous experiences that could help me now? When I felt this way in the past, what did I think about that helped me feel better? What's the worst that could happen? What's the most likely thing that could happen? And if the worst did happen, what could I do to help me cope with it?
Now, this is actually like facing the danger, looking the danger in the eye. What's the worst that can happen? I would fail in the presentation. People would laugh at me. So what's the big deal if that happens? Let me go through that experience. Then, and if the worst did happen, how could you cope with it? So, for example, there are students who fail at the presentations and then they go out and have fun with their friends. Oh, I did such a mistake and had such a slip of tongue, or I forgot, and they party over it. So the negative experience does not turn into an anxiety, does not condition you into thinking very negatively about those things. So you need to work it out. If things do happen, how you can sort those out or how you can cope with those things. So going through this question and answer session internally, specifically done internally, can help do wonders for you in terms of sorting out your communication apprehension.
And once you've looked at your thoughts and asked yourself some of these questions, you'll probably come up with an alternative view that helps balance out your negative thought and leads to a new way of thinking that's kinder to yourself and more helpful to you, and can improve your mood and make it easier to calm your mind and let your thoughts go. To calm your mind and let your thoughts go. The more often you do this, the more you start to train your mind to think differently in the first place. And so these negative thoughts come up less often, which is what we mean by cognitive restructuring. You're not just changing the way you think in this moment, but restructuring the way your mind works, developing a new and less negative way of thinking altogether. And please.
So, changing your attitude is only one element in overcoming communication apprehension. The other involves improving your skills as a speaker. The presence of communication apprehension in any student brings with it the need to prepare more deliberately and more diligently. As Mark Twain said, it usually takes him, he said about himself that it took him more than 3 weeks to prepare a good impromptu speech. I hope you know impromptu speech is one that seems as if it is being presented there and then without any preparation. So this is the trick of the trade. That's all for today. Thank you.